So yeah, thanks very much for coming on this evening. This is an event that is being hosted by both Your Space, a local community-led housing project and community land trust based in York, along with York Central Co-Owned, which I'll come on to explain a little bit more information about shortly, as well as our friend Paul Kelly, who's come beaming in live from Liverpool to talk about Homebaked CLT. And yeah, so we're hoping to talk today for around about 30 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be opportunities at the end for questions and discussion. So if people do have questions, please do jot those in the chat function. And yeah, so I'll kick things off. I'm going to hand over shortly in a couple of minutes to Phil Bixby. So this project, as I mentioned, is being run by York Central Co-Owned. And we're basically a group of local people that are really keen to see a site that's coming forward for development in York. Really keen to see that the voice of the local community is heard, and that we've taken forward some of these ideas that have been developed from a piece of work that was done by My York Central. Basically, this idea of YoCo and York Central Co-Owned is that we can take forward this co-owned neighbourhood to create something that's sustainable, something that's people-centred, and something that's got some dynamic economic models with fairness at its core. So, just to sort of give you a bit of context for this evening, I'm just going to hand over now to Phil. I think, can you unmute yourself, Phil? You can.
I can, apparently, yeah. It's good. I'll remember that.
So yeah, if you could just for a couple of minutes, Phil, just to talk about, for the context for this, because obviously the York Central Co-Owned has come about from this from the concept that you and Helen worked on. So if you could just give a few minutes on that, that'd be great.
Okay, quick run through what My York Central was about. So My York Central was a piece of work that I did along with Helen Graham, who's also in the room, looking at, which was part of the master planning process for the York Central site, the teardrop site behind the station. This all happened about 2 years ago. We put together a program of 4 weeks of events following an agenda which was set by local people. Many of the events that we ran were co-produced, co-organised with local people and individuals, and it very much kind of took a look right across the board about what people felt was important about the site, the kind of stuff they wanted to do there, and how those various issues then related with each other. Along with the 4 weeks of events, we ended up with about 2,500 post-it notes, all of which are still up on Flickr for you to enjoy at any moment you feel the need to enjoy some post-its. Out of it came a number of kind of what we felt were quite really well thought through documents. There was a public vision for the site which set out what people wanted to see happen there. And there was a set of 8 key big ideas which we felt kind of were the real kind of nub of that vision. And they included some really interesting stuff. So one of them was about the idea of a community made through exchange, a place which was brilliant simply because of what went on there and how the different uses of the place related to one another. People wanted to see moving beyond zoning. They wanted to see a mixed use neighbourhood. They wanted to see a place built for people and not cars. They wanted to see a place that catalysed York's creativity and innovation. So they all seemed like things that we wanted to enable to happen. And they also seemed like things that we felt probably wouldn't all simply kind of fall into place if they didn't get a bit of a nudge. And so we ran a series of initial events just to start exploring how they might be brought together, one of which was in fact during last year's York Design Week. And from that came a group of people who were keen to put some initial work in and start shaping what was starting to form up as York Central Co-Owned, YoCo, into something that could move forward and start to turn these ideas into reality. And at this point, I hand back to the lovely James.
Oh, thanks, Phil. You're also very lovely too. Thanks, Phil. So yeah, so to save time, I've just dropped in, there's some details there about my York Central, a bit more background if you want to read into that. But also I've just put a link to the YoCo website, because the sort of main event really this evening is Paul and Homebaked. And basically the reason we've invited Paul to talk is that over the course of 2020, despite COVID thwarting our best efforts to try and do a community-led project, we've done a huge amount of work over the last 6 to 7 months, which has been funded by Homes England's community-led housing programme. And what we've done with this funding is form the basis and the foundations for taking those ideas that Phil has just communicated there, taking those 8 big ideas and condensing that down into a strategic plan to deliver this community-owned neighbourhood. So we've been doing work around our vision. We've been doing lots of outreach. We've been really keen to try and engage as many people as we can, and we've done online events. We've done outreach events. We did York Festival of Ideas early this year, where we talked about how we could imagine a post-COVID neighbourhood, and cited various different examples of places in the UK that have done this. So Headingley Development Trust, for example, Coin Street Builders, and Homebaked CLT as well. And basically we've been talking through the vision. We've been condensing that down, and we've talked about these 3 elements of trying to be sustainable, trying to be affordable, and delivering new economic models, as well as making the project really people-centered and really people-powered. And so we've been doing lots of work around how we can embed those things within this organisation. So we've been doing work in terms of governance, the very sometimes unsexy subject of governance, and how we can embed fairness and our ethics as a local community into the type of organisation that we're going to make. And so we're now at a position where this work is coming to a conclusion. There's loads of blogs on the YoCo website that document the work that we've done. We're in a position now where we're looking to set up a temporary company to set this off, so a company with limited by guarantee, and so this evening is about learning from Homebaked, a project that have done something similar in Liverpool, and basically using the premise of this organisation to push forward something exciting and to learn from others, and so tonight we'll be introducing Homebaked and what they've done, but we'll also be been doing a sort of call to arms. Like, if you're interested in being involved in this, then please do, because we're looking at developing affordable housing, we're looking at developing affordable business space, community-owned public spaces, and in a way that they can support each other both financially and socially. So it seems a good time to invite Paul in. I won't say any more because I'm really excited to hear Paul talk, and you've probably had enough of me already. But yeah, so I think Paul's going to talk for around about 25-30 minutes, and then we're going to have an open discussion at the end regarding how we can try and emulate this in York. So if you're okay and ready to go, Paul, are you able to share your screen, please?
Let's see if it works. Can everyone see that? Can see
definitely
it,
see your
maybe?
Screen. Yeah.
Can you see that, everybody? Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, James. It's really good to be here and I've been following what you've been doing over there in York. And I suppose I just thought tonight it'd be interesting for me to tell you about the Homebaked story here in Liverpool. Very different context, but I think there's some similarities of process and stuff that I think would be interesting for you. I'll try and do a warts and all as well, be quite honest about the journey we've been through here. And then maybe at the end or through the chat, people can write down any thoughts or comments or have a discussion at the end of it. So my name's Paul Kelly. I am the company secretary of Homebaked Community Land Trust, which was set up in 2012. So it's 8 years old this December. And actually, I've also just become the first director of the Liverpool City Region Community-Led Housing Hub that we're setting up. I started that role in April, so I'm actually going to be standing down from Homebaked at the AGM at Christmas. So it's kind of quite a nice time for me to be talking about the whole journey and where we've got to, and to be leaving that behind a little bit, but continuing to support it. People might know a bit about Homebaked. Often the story isn't quite the profile that it's got. It's kind of a bit more complicated to it. There's a bakery, there's a land trust, there's a football club, and so it'd just be good for me to be able to outline the project. Just to give you a bit of context, Anfield, where Homebaked is based, obviously people are aware of the two football clubs, Everton and Anfield, in Everton and Liverpool in the city of Liverpool. Very close to each other. Stanley Park there, you see in the background, is between the two clubs. And Anfield was kind of a very interesting old neighbourhood that very much housed the dockers in the north part of the city. And what was quite fascinating about Anfield as a neighbourhood is it's the sort of place that you would have traditionally said was an ideal neighbourhood. It kind of had everything. So it had your business owners living in big houses next door to the 2 up, 2 down dockers cottages, but also had all the infrastructure that you needed for a neighbourhood to thrive. So this was, interestingly, it was kind of like the textbook neighbourhood I always define it as historically. And included in that, it still has there's still a cow shed in the area that the dairy was based from. And Homebaked Bakery, which I'll talk about, was actually built as a bakery to feed the community. The football club was in the heart of the community as well for the last 130 years. So it's kind of, in some ways, a bit of a tragedy what has happened to Anfield over the last 20, 25 years. But also out of that is coming some sort of new energy and new vitality in terms of how communities can be involved in redefining their places. For the last 25 years or so, it's been an area of special economic support, particularly the Anfield neighbourhood. So it was an area seen as part of a declining place. And Liverpool Football Club, people might be aware of, about 20 years ago, was looking to actually move to build a new stadium in the park. So that whole process started about 22 years ago. And as part of that process, there's been a kind of continual regeneration master plan in the neighbourhood that has seen huge amounts of demolition and clearance of people's houses in the neighbourhood, built back by, on this picture you can see at the bottom, some new build houses for sale, and people really displaced from what the community is all about. Interestingly, today, where we're at today, is the football club aren't moving. And an anecdote I always use in this story is that when the football club was looking to move, the first thing they demolished in the park was a youth club that the young people of Anfield used to use really intensively. And that was demolished probably about 18 years ago, and nothing has probably been put back in its place. So it's been a process of lack of engagement, lack of real engagement with people. That is the essence of where the Homebaked project came from. During this time, the government's Housing Market Renewal Initiative, which I don't think would have touched York, but which touched a huge part of Merseyside, came about. And that ran from about 2003 to 2011. And it was the Labour government at the time trying to look at a scale of regeneration that really ended up just focusing on market values rather than people. And so here is the sign that these signs still litter Liverpool. A brighter Anfield is coming. And this was the kind of project at the time to look at reimagining the place. But what these programs failed to do in their implementation was actually really engage people in the governance and the stewardship of these regeneration processes. And between 2007 and 2010, I was actually working with the Housing Market Renewal Initiative, partly funded by them and partly funded by the Arts Council, to look at creative solutions to engage people in the process. And previously to that, I'd been involved in a major housing action trust program in the city. So was very involved in engaging people in creative processes around change. So I'm very interested in how neighbourhoods can change and adapt, but how people can be in the driving seat of that. And what was happening in Anfield started to be quite shocking. So they were clearing lots and lots of streets like this. I mean, I can't tell you how many properties like this were cleared. People might have owned these houses, lived in them. They were very low value, probably about £40,000 a property. So the idea was that they would buy up these properties and start moving people out and start rebuilding houses for sale that usually would start at about 140, £50,000. So this became a real process of displacement. At the time, and I don't know if anybody is aware of the work of Jana van Heeswijk, but if you aren't, I would encourage you to look at her website and the work she does. At the time, the job I was doing was partly linked to Liverpool Biennial, and I started to work with Jana van Heeswijk, who's an artist based in Rotterdam in Holland. And I went to spend some time with her. She delivered a project, a very famous project kind of globally, called the Blue House. And what she did was she, in Amsterdam, as part of the regeneration of Amsterdam, they built an island, a new neighbourhood called Iborg. And it was a 10-year project to build 10,000 new houses on a new island that they had to actually construct. And Jana took over one of the first houses that was built, this house called the Blue House. And over a period of about 8 years, she just followed the regeneration and building of this new neighbourhood and brought in interventions. And that is what she does. She works with public policy to explore interventions about community and neighbourhood renewal. So we decided in about 2008, Liverpool was capital of culture that year, so there was quite a lot of arts money sloshing around, to invite Jana to come and work with us in Liverpool to explore her developing a project in the area. And that project that emerged was Homebaked. Jana, she spent about 2 years getting to know the community, and we did all sorts of stuff, and we were looking at, she did a quite amazing project where she documented all the materials of the buildings that were being demolished in Anfield and where they were actually being taken to, because she discovered that a lot of the bricks and a lot of the wood and a lot of the building materials were actually being taken to London to be used in developments in London. And she did a project where she was almost being quite provocative and reflective with the community about their role within the wider neighbourhood regeneration. And as part of the project, she became very fixated on this bakery. So the Mitchell's Bakery is opposite the football club. It was actually just outside the regeneration compulsory purchase zone of the area. And so the family who owned it, the Mitchells, were in their 80s by this is around 2010, and they couldn't sell their building because it wasn't worth anything, but they couldn't continue. And so working with the community, we decided that we were going to take over the bakery and develop a project in it that we would be exploring through the bakery. And the community were very clear that they felt that they could make a going concern of a community-led bakery in the neighbourhood, and were really passionate about that bakery having been built there to provide for the people of the community. And this was at a time when the council's view was actually this building and this block needed to be just demolished and the usual type of building put back, and maybe if you're lucky, a Tesco Express or a co-op will let out one of the commercial units. And that would kind of be the aspiration for the neighbourhood. And the community actually started to push back and start to say, hang on a minute, you know, we need to take more control of this. Because people were very passionate about the place and about the connection it had. And as I say, it is right diagonally opposite the football club, which, you know, pre-COVID, every other week you were getting 50,000 people coming on a match day. And up until this point, all of the concessions around food were owned by the football club. So through working with the artists and exploring ideas, the community started to look at, well, how can we benefit from some of that income coming into the area for our benefit? And I think that's where, although our context might differ, actually the economic driver of the football club in Anfield is extraordinary. The football club is still the most visited building in Liverpool, even during COVID. People come there in their taxis, go to the museum and come out, and that's more popular than the Tate or anywhere else. So how can that economic potential be harnessed for local people? And Gianna was able to kind of, as a kind of independent voice in this, explore that with local people. So we started to use the bakery. We actually let it from the family. We said to the family, you can retire, because they couldn't go on, and we rented it from them. And at that point, it was still the organisation I was working for, Liverpool Biennial, rented it, and we turned it into a kind of a lab to explore how people wanted to live, work and play well into the future in Anfield. So it became like, and at that point it was quite a falling down building, I have to say, but it became quite a kind of hub for free thinking. So people would come together, explore ideas, and it was very creatively led, the whole process. And what became very clear, probably over a period of a year, was a group of women in the community that absolutely fired up about the potential of running a bakery as a cooperative. So by 2011, 2012, we started to constitute two organisations, both called Homebaked, to work collaboratively on developing these ideas. So there was Homebaked Co-op, which is an independent organisation, and Homebaked Community Land Trust. And originally, most of the people were the same. We started out with quite a same group of people, but 8 years down the line, we've now moved on and we've got new people involved in the co-op bakery and in the CLT. But the idea was that we would have a vehicle to, the Community Land Trust would become the vehicle to retain ownership of assets by and for the community, whilst at the same time supporting and nurturing community-based businesses to flourish. So the Land Trust worked collaboratively with the people, because most of us were the same, to develop the co-op bakery and develop the business plan of the bakery, whilst we were also working to develop the Land Trust. Over probably a period of 4 or 5 years, we started, I think the first thing we did was get the money for a bread oven, sorry. We did a crowdfunder that ended up being on the One Show, and you know, we raised about £50,000 from that. And that then sparked the whole idea of how we could develop money to develop the unit. And gradually the whole concept of the bakery and its pies, it's become quite famous for its pies. It has, you know, the Shankly pie that the Shankly family, who was the manager of Liverpool, have given their endorsement to. We have a Klopp pie for the great Jurgen Klopp, who's bringing glory back to the city. And so it's really, really grown as a bakery, and it's had a huge amount of profile. And currently it employs 22 people. It is now 8 years in, a fully profitable company, investing itself about £300,000 back into the local community. Within a mile radius is where they do their business and get their stuff from. And it's also able to be really flexible with people in terms of, some people work from home and bake from home, some people work hours to fit in with their family, and it's very much a stepping stone for people in the community who then might go off. You know, we've had some people who've started working in the bakery who have gone off to set up restaurants in the centre of Liverpool, but originally from Anfield. And so the bakery is very much a social enterprise, completely independent. It's its own body now. It's got new people on its board, and hugely successful. And very much linked in with the football club, Everton Football Club, all the great institute businesses in the city, and huge amount of support to enable it to thrive. They're also really brilliant pies. So it's not just about people being philanthropic, it actually is an incredible business. So the bakery, we've refurbished over the last 8 years. We've brought in money through the CLT and through the bakery to do up the building. So they now are our tenants. They're a tenant of the Community Land Trust, and we are able to keep our rents relatively low for them to enable them to thrive. So early on, you know, there were periods where they couldn't afford to pay the rent, and we could be flexible on that. But as their business has grown, we're able to adapt, because the CLT isn't about making huge amounts of money. It's about enabling a community business to thrive and be sustainable. And the bakery is now 8 years in. It's going great guns, and that's fantastic. Above the bakery was a 2-story flat masonette that was really falling to bits. And during that time, the CLT also started to look at housing. So we decided that we were going to turn this into a unit to rent out to local people, and we set up a design group of local people and worked with young people from the area. We had an architect who was involved with Assemble, who did some work in Granby, involved with us. And it was very much a training, active learning program with young people from the community about what it means to live well. And we probably 3 years ago now finished that property. So we have the first home in Homebaked that we as a Community Land Trust now rent out. It's a quirky, quite high spec flat. It's a 4-bedroom furnished flat that we let out, and it's been hugely successful. So attached, if you see this picture, just at the bottom there on the right hand side is the bakery sticking out, and attached to it we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think there are 12 houses that are currently derelict. And so the CLT have, as part of the whole process of developing the business in the bakery and developing the flat, have decided that we want to, brick by brick, loaf by loaf is our motto, rebuild the high street of Anfield to enable the local community to have ownership of it and access to it to develop their community businesses into perpetuity. So this building here these buildings here are owned by the City Council, and we now have agreement that we can develop this terrace into a new project that will house 8 new housing units and 3 new community business spaces into perpetuity that the Community Land Trust will own, and the council will gift us those buildings to develop. So we spent, and just at the end of that block as well, we've got this open green space as well. So we've been working, using that space, animating the space. We actually took over one of these houses and turned it into our office as a CLT, and had events in there, and had ourselves a presence in the community and made use of the empty buildings. And we've kind of been exploring how people in a place like Anfield, in a neighbourhood that's deemed, you know, it needs intervention, can actually build their own high street. We believe we've shown it with the bakery, and we've actually got another business that we've nurtured who are going to move into our end community business property. And this is, again, they describe themselves as 2 middle-aged women from Anfield who have set up Homegrown Collective, which is going to be a brewery. So they've just launched, they've been growing hops in the community over the last year, and they've just launched their first beers, and they're just amazing. I mean, really high quality. So they're going to have a brewery and a space at the end that will spill out into the green space. And they're called Homegrown Collective. Again, fully independent business. We've been supporting them to get to that point. But the idea is that that becomes our reason for being as the Land Trust, to develop these spaces, provide these spaces for low rent, but also to nurture businesses and local people in the area to make their ideas come to fruition. One of the other spaces is potentially going to be an art gallery, studio, and we've got a whole process of enterprise development with the local community in place. obviously that's gone a bit on hold with COVID, but particularly doing a lot of work with young people through schools as well about what their aspirations might be to run a business. Huge amount of community engagement work over the years, using open spaces, looking at, you know, what works, what doesn't, temporary interventions, to try and be quite high profile during this whole process. And also to try and be engaging with football fans, because as I say, every other week there'd be 40,000, 50,000 people going to the match. And Homebaked, the bakery, has become a real magnet for those fans. They're incredibly supportive of the business. So lots of exciting stuff, and also trying to do that promotion around doing it for ourselves. So the notion, there's quite an historic notion actually in Liverpool where it's for the corporation to do everything for you. We're trying to turn that on its head a bit and let people understand that they can take control of their own destinies and communities. So to date, in terms of our accomplishments, we've campaigned to protect the bakery from demolition and extended it, and really built up the membership of the CLT. The bakery business, as I said, is fully functioning, and we've got a 4-bedroom flat upstairs that we've been letting for 2 years. Lots of supporting of local community businesses. Further up the road, there's also a laundrette, Kitty's Laundrette, that's a cooperative laundrette. And we've started the council are now committed to us as a model for how we can be part of the regeneration of Anfield. Our next steps are to develop the terrace. And what we're going to do there is refurbish and retrofit the old housing stock so that it's a very high spec environmental retrofit scheme with ground source heat pumps, that sort of stuff. Going to cost a lot, but actually we believe that's about putting down a marker in terms of the quality of what places like Anfield should have. We will have 3 more units in there for social businesses, and we're going to be developing those and supporting those. We then are promoting the buzz about the high street and bringing that whole of the high street back, because it's a very big neighbourhood in Anfield. It's a very long, derelict high street, so we're trying to look at this becoming the vision for the future. And the ownership of the assets are absolutely critical to this. That's what this is all about. It's keeping that both locally, socially, and financially in the ownership of local people. So that's the design that we've got planning permission for. We're hoping to go on site around March time. It's a £2 million scheme, so it's costly. And we're looking at a whole range of options for how that's going to be funded. But huge amount of council support. And I think the thing I wanted to end on with this a little bit was that what's been very interesting about Homebaked is it started very, very much as a project of agitation. So it was a project pushing back at what was going on to people and around them. And this document here is part of the master plan for Anfield, and I think at the moment it's currently on iteration number 8 or something in the last 12 years. There's a new master plan all the time. But I think about 3 years ago, we were asked whether Homebaked could actually be part of the master plan, because up till then we'd been seen as a little bit left field, a bit out there, and kind of not part of the solution. And we had an amazing kind of 6 months as a board looking at where do we want to be, and actually took the decision that actually we wanted to be in the picture. We didn't want to be sat outside just talking to ourselves. We needed to be seen to be part of the solution. And currently, right now, I think post-COVID, this idea of building back better, we believe quite strongly that it's notions and projects like this that I know are getting great. What Liverpool is interested in right now is how you can scale these up to happen much quicker, and how you can support communities to do this, so that it doesn't take 8 years to build 9 houses and 3 commercial units. How can you do that in 4 or 5 years? How can you make it much quicker and of scale? And that's where we've got to now. And it was interesting, there were some people who didn't want us to be in that position, but I think looking back now, they would say, actually, we're in the right place. We're very strong on our values and our core and what we're about, but unless we're part of the bigger picture and sat around the table with the football club and the local authority, then change isn't going to happen. So it's been a really exciting journey. We're where we're at, and yeah, I don't know if that sparked anything in anybody here. So I shall stop sharing.
Thanks, Paul. That's really, really good. And I was on a call this earlier today, and we realised the thing we're lacking with this virtual thing is that we can't all hear the applause, which I'm sure there would be. But I'm definitely going to be using the clapping function at the minute. That was really, really, really great story, and I'm going to abuse my power as the host to get in the first couple of questions. But I will invite people to write their questions in the chat box. So yeah, really, really, really inspiring. And looking at some of the comments that have come back in the chat, I really liked someone drawing the parallels here between the football stadium here in York that's been closed down, and the football club moving away, and maybe there's something there. Yeah, just lots of really positive chat. And I think that the thing that strikes me is one of the things that you said is that Anfield harnessing that the economic potential that's actually harnessed by the local community. And I think that when we've been having the early stage discussions in YoCo, there was quite a fierce sort of lively debate when we were trying to sort of boil up and condense down our vision, that idea that it wants to be transformative, it wants to be radical change, and at the heart of that needs to be new economic models. And this is something that your space in York have been doing with challenging the perception of home ownership and as a community land trust, but also seeing that it's quite limited if you're only focusing on housing, and by connecting it to the local community, whether that's local businesses or universities or anything like that. And so it's really, really, really inspiring to hear the story. And I'd like to come on to talk about the bakery as the sort of anchor for the project, because just to sort of bring to people's attention, the site that we're looking at in York with York Central, there is a community there, but there's actually a large expanse of undeveloped land, and there is a building that the York Central Co-Owned team and my York Central have been trying to get access to have that anchor, to have that hub. So I guess what I'm really keen to know, could you just talk us through those early stages, because we're at this point now where we've done a lot of foundational work in terms of talking about a vision, what we want to achieve, and now we need to sort of use those foundations as a springboard. So I was really keen to understand, you could talk us through those early days, that the key steps that you took to get going, and how you talked about how you created that sense of ownership, and how I can see all the community engagement you did, but I guess it's understanding the key steps and if you pardon the pun, the key ingredients in terms of how you sort of set that up. Thanks, Phil. Because I think that we're at a pivotal point now for this project in York that we're hugely inspired by projects like Homebaked, and I'm just really keen to know what was the catalyst for it all, and what was key in the early stages.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was, so I had been working with Liverpool Housing Action Trust for 12 years, just prior to getting involved in this project. And through that, and that was a big government regeneration scheme, and I was part of, I led the community engagement function. We demolished all the tower blocks in Liverpool and built houses on their footprints for all the people living in them. So there were 67 tower blocks, and most of them got demolished. And it was an incredible process of real creativity. And I did, although I'm not from an arts background at all, I started to do some projects through that, very creative projects, really trying to engage people in how neighbourhoods and communities can look and be, and how people can be part of the governance of them. And some of those projects were quite high profile. We did a project called Tenant Spin that was like this internet television station, that we set up in 1999. It was very before Facebook and everything, where the tenants of the tower blocks were able to use the medium to explore their thoughts. So it was quite a radical program. And then Liverpool was becoming capital of culture. So I started to work for Liverpool Biennial, which is quite a radical arts organisation in the city, was pushing. I think Liverpool Biennial really was an instigator for the reimagining of the whole city, really, in terms of what it achieved. And so I was almost given license to use artists that were quite provocative. So we used the streets a lot to engage people. We did an amazing project with an American artist whose name is just escapes him, where he actually created an animation in that we took down all this boarded up houses and created a video installation across a whole terrace of houses. So we started to really explore those ideas. And one also idea we had was we were working with young people and they wanted to create a go-kart ring in and out of a terrace row of houses that would become a business, so that it become the funkiest go-kart business in the Northwest, because you'd be driving in and out of houses up and down around them. So we were really letting people loose with their thinking and then making it very visible on the streets so that people couldn't avoid being part of the conversation. And also Jana was she was interesting as an artist because and this is a very Liverpool thing, and I've lived here since 1983, so I'm very much part of the fabric of the city, but Liverpool people like to have a real good moan about everything. So Anfield was full of public meetings. You would have a meeting every week where everybody would pile into meetings and shout at the authority, have a good Barney, spend a good couple of hours ranting, and then at the end they'd leave and say, right, now get on with it. And Jana started to spin that around and to make people realize they aren't going to get on with it. They're not going to get on with it. And when they started to demolish houses that people had lived in, who were involved with Homebake, their families had owned them. And Jana was able to explore with them how, because the demolition contractors weren't paid much money to demolish the houses, they were given all the materials. And when we found out that there was an amazing Victorian school, that all the wood went to loft apartments in London because she traced it through the demolition contractors and just gave that information back to the community. That started to make people realize they could have a voice in this. There are alternatives, but that they needed to step up to the plate. And it was mainly women in the community around the bakery who started that process of, it became a social connection, the baking. And because then there just happened to be a bakery, it was almost like really honing in on what assets there were that we could make use of. But I can't stress enough that provocation at the start. The council, certainly for the first 5 years, wished we weren't there, really. They wished we would just get out of the way, because they had, there was a zoned housing association, the council and the football club, and those three elements were going to sort Anfield. And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but a bit of provocation and a bit of just doing and making it social, I think was really important. And creativity.
Great. And yeah, I just to pick up a question that's come in on the chat, and I've got a bit of insight because we had a bit of a chat before this evening. But obviously we sort of alluded to sort of warts and all, and I suppose one of the things that we're conscious of with a project like this is that there's so many different elements potentially to it, with businesses and housing and public space, and there could be not necessarily everybody on the same page at any one time. And I guess I'd be interested to know about some of the challenges that you've faced. And so, to alluding to one of the questions from Robert in the chat, the sort of warts and all type of thing, what have been the challenges, and what and how have you managed those in terms of those competing views or those competing drivers?
Yeah, I think the challenge was that the negative side of the art stuff was Liverpool Biennial is a very high art organisation, working with, some of the greatest. I happen to have worked with some of those great artists, and it's fantastic, but that can sometimes be seen as a bit of elitist, and also the parachuting in of that relationship into a neighbourhood like Anfield. And I think because of the work I'd done previously with the Housing Action Trust, that had gained a lot of kudos and a lot of trust in people, that it was about the long term. It was about having that relationship for 12 years now. This project's been going on. Jana is still involved. She's on the board. She's still engaged. And it's about that long-term change. but also about being frank about that sometimes having an artist from Amsterdam, you know, it doesn't have to be local. We want, you know, Jana is very well known for this work globally. I think 2 years into the project, she won the Annenberg Foundation Award for Public Engaged Art from New York, and she got a £25,000 prize, and she gave it to Homebaked. That was her gift to the project. And so she's a big player, and we weren't scared of that. We weren't scared of being frank with people, that sometimes you need people with great ideas and minds to be part of the process. But actually it's a very collaborative, cooperative process of discussion and debate. And I think that's important. I think I lost the strand there.
No, I think it was good. I mean, you talked about the role of the local authority, and it's interesting. There's some parallels there that rang some bells there with some early stages of the project I mentioned before. Your space, you know, being provocative and sometimes making just as many friends as you make enemies within the local authority. And I think someone's asked the question, like, would it be possible to link up Liverpool City Council with York City Council? You know, this is probably more of a technical, practical question, really, but it would be good to think after this that we could possibly get the decision makers at Liverpool speaking to the decision makers of York. I don't know if that's something, and which connections you'd be able to share with us, Paul.
I think it would be interesting, because we are now, with us developing the hub, and we're one of the later hubs to develop, I think, nationally, but the context is interesting now for us in terms of getting things embedded in policy in Liverpool. So, because also we've got Granby 4th Street CLT, which was developing its project at the same time. And it's interesting how both were artist-led projects, and Assemble, who developed that, won the Turner Prize in 2015. And so and because of City of Culture, there's been a kind of openness to this kind of approach, but we're only now getting it embedded in policy, but there's a real interest in that becoming something that drives forward housing strategy and neighbourhood renewal strategies in the city. And I think we're at a really good point. So I think there'd be some interesting potential discussions with policymakers around that. And one of the things that I've been very clear about, Homebaked and Granby got very high profiles quite quickly because of the biennial and things, and actually that also can be a hindrance, really, because there have been moments where, and still the relationship at the moment with the bakery isn't great, because there's new people on the bakery board, they're very successful, they're very busy. The CLT is doing some of the structural stuff behind the scenes, and that isn't sexy. Do you know what I mean? Pies are quite sexy. But we really believe that the bakery is about more than a bakery. It's about being part of this movement of community ownership. So we want a bakery, we want a brewery, we want whatever, all these businesses to collaboratively own the neighbourhood. And that's the exciting bit that sometimes people lose sight of a little bit, because that's the big vision, and keeping the track of that big vision is quite important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. It kind of follows on from that question. We've got Helen Graham on the call, who's part of My York Central with Phil, and she's talking in the question. I won't read out the long question; it's a very long question, but it talks about the sort of differences between the economic situation that particular part of Liverpool is compared to, say, York. And you know, Helen talks about part of our challenge is to take the inspiration of, you know, and the ambition that you've had in working with that, you know, local economic failures that you have there. You know, have you got any examples of community-led developments like this in any high land value, expensive gentrified places? Is that, you know, in terms of local authorities talking to other local authorities, oh, we did this over here, kind of thing? Is there anything that you've heard on the grapevine or you've had direct experience of?
Yeah, well, slightly attached to this is the Baltic Creative in Liverpool, in the centre of Liverpool. That, interestingly, when I was working at Liverpool Biennial, we were based in the Baltic, what's called the Baltic Triangle, which at that time was just a few empty garages, and the Biennial took over one of the empty spaces, and it was an old industrial site, but quite near the city centre of Liverpool, quite near the Albert Dock, and again, because of capital culture, that whole area has been transformed, partly through the asset transfer to a community interest company that's community-led. And the Keynes Brewery Village as well has become this huge kind of alternative economic success story in the centre of Liverpool, but it's a community-led vehicle that has done that. And interestingly, we're just talking to them about their first potential large-scale development that will be a community-led housing scheme of maybe 100 or so units. So wow. That's, yeah, and that's been a powerhouse of part of slightly seeping out of the city centre, but creating something really a bit left field in an area that, as I say, up till 2010, when I was working there was one little sandwich shop and a little butchie van that would turn up to feed the people working in garages. And it's now become a very very digital-led business area, but also keeping some of those traditional industries in that area too. So it's a real hodgepodge of people, a bit sort of very organically driven, but hugely successful independent businesses. So they're called Baltic Creative. If you look at their website, that's a really interesting one.
Great.
The other thing I would just say about Anfield though, and this is we feel very strongly about, people were always talked down to of needing fixing, and Anfield didn't need fixing, but it was an area of huge resource coming into the community. There was a huge economic powerhouse there. It just wasn't touching the people of Anfield anymore. It was really removed from them. And so in a way, we feel quite strongly about the fact that it wasn't an area that always needed subsidies. It's an area that just needs that wealth that the football club had, particularly, to be harnessed for the benefit of local people. And the football club get that now, you know, all their concessions for food, they're now much open to the idea of community-led. You know, they buy the pies to go in their VIP lounges, for instance, which is absolutely fantastic.
Great. Now, I'm gonna pick on Phil in a second. Now, I'm not sure, Phil, whether or not your original question around about the role of artists has been answered. So I'm gonna unmute you in a second to do that, but because I think it might have been answered. But it's just telling that we have got a lot of creative people involved in the project, and you know we've done some quite interesting things in our initial outreach, and in terms of, I know Julia's on the call with you know, co-creating a poem both with people at a picnic and people in a virtual picnic. I'm trying to unmute you, Phil. I must admit I'm struggling. Just bear with me 1 second. See if I can do this. I can change this. You can unmute yourself, I think. Hold on. There you go. If you can unmute yourself, Phil. Yeah, I'll put you over to Phil.
I'm unmuted, right? Cool. Yeah, I guess the root of my question was largely about how you shift people from objecting to things to having a vision of what might be possible as an alternative. I think one of the things with York Central as a site, which is where YoCo is based, it has this incredibly long kind of distant hinterland of 30 years of failure for anything to happen, and there's a lot of cynicism around. And I think that one of the things that came out of the publication of the master plan was that whereas, you know, during the work that Helen and I did, people talked a lot about wanting affordable homes, people talked about wanting you know, kind of stuff for local people there. The master plan still kind of looks slightly glossy and slightly like it might turn into something which is done to the city rather than with the people of the city. So that, wondering how we use art in a genuine way. So not one of the other questions was about kind of art wash. We kind of want to avoid that, but how do we use art and that creative process to genuinely enable people to engage in different ways with the process and become part of, you know, seeing how something might be and then creating it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've it's interesting. I picked up one of the comments there, but Red Ladder Theatre Company, who I think are based in Leeds, are actually doing a musical based on Homebaked. So they're writing a musical at the moment that will be launched next year in Liverpool at the Royal Court, which was kind of an interesting thing. And that process has started talking to people about the journey. But for us, it was always about stories, and it was always about being positive. It was, I think Liverpool as a city has been, I think, a place of special economic support for actually about 90 years. This is a long-standing period of change from industrial decline over decades. It's not just the 60s, 70s or whatever. And I think we got to a point where, and again, through working with creative organisations involved in these processes, supporting people, it was about moving the story forward and the narrative forward. Or just accepting that nothing is going to happen and you're not going to have control about it. And there were lots of really tense, ranting discussions through the whole process of saying to people, well, nothing will change if you don't get involved. And that's slowly chipping away. And having a core group of people, I think that was really important. You don't need to have everybody there, but you need to have a strong core of people. You know, you've got a really good turnout tonight, but if you can galvanize 15 people to become a really strong, committed group of the coalition of the willing, really, isn't it? It's about people who want to create build on the historic narrative, but look forward with positivity. That was really important to us. And animating people's personal stories through that journey, I think, is really important.
Thanks, Paul. And actually, that's very, very timely because I'm just going to drop into the chat now a sort of a blog post. I'd encourage people to go and check out the blog if you want to know more about what YoCo are up to, but that sort of call to arms, and we are keen to get a really, really diverse range of people involved in this next phase, people that wouldn't ordinarily get involved in a project like this. And I think that's what, for me, does come through in the work that Homebaked have done in terms of, you know, accessing parts of the community that people would otherwise wouldn't normally access if it's you know, the sort of classic local authority public engagement, which isn't very effective. And so I would encourage people to go and check out. And if you're in York and you're interested in being part of York CentralCon, then please do follow that link and have a look. There's you can email our team here because we are looking for a group of people that are going to sort of take forward the next steps to turn the project into a reality. So I'm very conscious that I'd like to finish bang on time and we're almost there. So I just wanted to say thank you again, Paul, for coming along. It is a wonderfully inspiring story, and it gives us a bit of hope. I know there's a lot of people on the call this evening who've been involved in some way, shape or form over the last few months. And so just to thank you again, and I hope that we can maybe get you back again, or we can get you to offer some pearls of wisdom further down the line when we start to probably generate some more traction once we've accessed some more funding and maybe got our hands on our building that we can turn into our own sort of bakery, our own sort of hub and anchor for the project. So yeah, thank you again, and I'll hope to speak to you soon, and thank you for everyone who attended as well. I hope to see you soon.
And if you want to copy the chat and email it over, I'll try and answer some of the questions separately and get it back to you.
That's great. That's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, there's a few questions. I think most of them have been asked, but yeah, please if you could, that would be great, and we'll share that on the mailing list. So yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Imelda. Everyone else who's contributed to this evening, and do check out more events on York Design Week. There's so much good stuff on this week. So yeah, thanks again. Bye.